Getting the oh yeah.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. I am delighted to introduce my guest today. He's one of the favourite guests I have on here, just judging from all the comments and love I get whenever he's here, and also one of the favourite people I think in the community. I will let him introduce himself. Aziz, why don't you say hi?
Hi, Robert. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm happy to be back on your show. We've definitely had some great discussions in the past. And, well, what timing for this one? You know, you and I both do a lot of coverage of the backstory, the history, and, of course, we have Fire and Blood coming out soon. And George dropped a really interesting, almost maybe you might call it a bombshell just today. So that would be a fun thing to talk about and whatever else people have in mind for us. So, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we've got, as always, I've got a whole load of questions from my patrons that we're going to be working our way through. We'll pick up stuff that comes up in the chat as well. And obviously, if they're super chats, then we will get to them too. Just want to say thank you, first of all, to we had a couple of super chats before we went live. Christy Miller saying, no question, just keep up the good work. Thank you so much. And Maura Lee, $25. Thank you. That's very generous. Saying, no questions, keep up the good work. Looking forward to your videos on Fire and Blood Part 1 after the book comes out later this month. It's actually on Tuesday, the book's coming out, so it's very soon.
Cheers.
And, really looking forward to that. And as I'm sure Aziz and many others are doing, I'll be covering that in quite a lot of depth. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But why don't we kick off? Well, I will kick off actually with something that came through on Twitter from Jay, who just said, I can't be there, but as a new Patreon supporter, I demand this question be answered. How are you? I am well. Thank you very much. I've had quite a busy day, and I am literally only now just catching up on all of the news that's been going on in the world of Ice and Fire today. So other than that, everything is good. But we will, talking of that, and it was literally just 2 minutes before we were about to go on air, I saw a tweet from LML, I think it was referencing across to it, the news that George R.R. Martin has dropped about Aegon the Conqueror. And actually, Vanessa Cole, another one of our favorite guests that I have on here. Hi, Vanessa. Great to see you. Super chat. Thank you so much. Saying, hi, guys. Would love to get your thoughts on GRRM's comments today that Aegon I may have united Westeros to prepare for the others' invasion. So I'll give a little bit of background here, and then Aziz, I'd love your thoughts on this one. So this was in kind of build up to Fire and Blood. George R.R. Martin's been doing a few little 2-minute videos just describing a few of the things that we're going to be finding out in Fire and Blood. And this time he released today, he was talking about Aegon I. He gave us a little bit of background about Balerion, the Black Dread, and he just sort of dropped in there that and the exact quote was, there is a lot of speculation that Aegon I knew about the threat of the others, or had some thoughts about the possible threat from the others, and this was what motivated him to take over Westeros and unite the 7 kingdoms into one. So that's the kind of the background. Aziz, why don't you kick us off? What's your quick take on this? Is this news to you? Does it make you view anything any differently?
Well, it'll take a little while for us to digest it. Like you said, this is extremely fresh news, like a matter of hours at most. It's not entirely new. We've definitely heard this theory before. The new part is that George is bringing it up. That's the part that's really quite something. Now, I see some people pointing out in the chat that George, or Ilio rather, clarified that this was in response to fan speculation, which it almost has to be, because right now, as we all know, in Westeros, there's basically nobody aware of the others, minus a few Night's Watchmen and maybe a few people with prophetic powers. Not getting too deep into that, who the specifics are, but as we know, basically the whole realm is ignorant of the others. So when he says there has been speculation that Aegon did this, he has to be talking about fans, because the characters in Westeros cannot have possibly made those speculations. They're not aware of who else would have made those speculations? But still, it's really incredible to hear that it has a lot of ramifications for the original Long Night, what we might expect to learn about that and how they may have reacted to it, as well as it casts a lot of interesting notions about Targaryen prophecy. Their ability to the dragon dreams and such like that may have been more prevalent than we've been led to believe in the past. It may have been more common. So yeah, it's really interesting. I'm pretty hyped to continue thinking about this and talking about it and see what people in the chat have to say too. I'm sure there's going to be, whenever we get new news like this, everybody jumps on it and takes a while to think about it. But this is kind of unique that we're getting to do it live.
Yeah, exactly, and I would echo that. I'd love to hear what you think in the chat. My initial 2 or 3 thoughts on this. So I think it's really important, that phrase that you picked up on, that there is a lot of speculation that this isn't George R.R. Martin confirming it. I saw someone in the chat saying that actually Elio said that that's not going to even be in the book. This was just him saying that what some people have been theorizing is. But the fact that he mentioned it does seem to imply to me that he gives it some sort of weight as a possibility. And I think that the two things here, the first, as you say, is about the magic within the Targaryens. We kind of implicitly think of it just that they've just got dragon magic. They're controlling the dragons. It's about fire and blood and that kind of stuff. But we underplay this idea of dreams and visions of prophecy, which we get Daenerys the Dreamer. We kind of understand theoretically that they do, but we don't actually see many examples of this. So is this perhaps a hint that this is actually a bigger thing for the Targaryens than we thought it might have been? Could someone like Rhaegar have had more of the kind of the magical powers that we might think? Could Bloodraven have been having more of these kind of Targaryen powers, and not just the powers of the old gods and stuff that he got later on? So is there more magical power there in the Targaryens than we might have originally thought? And secondly, at a thematic level, I think it really just underlines once again that this is about ice and fire. These are about these two competing forces, and actually there we have he is playing with this idea that the forces of fire, dragons, Targaryens, they are setting themselves up in opposition to ice. It's not just an accident that they're there. They are deliberately setting themselves up in opposition, and this is a part of the overall narrative that he's trying to sort of bring forward. So those are my initial thoughts. I don't think we should put too much weight on this, because it sounds like George R.R. Martin isn't putting too much weight on this. He's not saying this is why he did. He's not saying, and then Aegon had this dream when he saw da-di-da-di-da, and therefore he did this. I don't think that's what's going to happen here. This is just a little bit of extra colouring around the edges, really, more than anything else. But Aziz, have you been looking in the chat? Has anything else come up while we've been talking?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of excitement about it. There's maybe not a lot of full like theories yet, but people are having fun with it. I think it's interesting to consider something else he said in light of this, which was that he pointed out how the Targaryens moved to Dragonstone, and at first they were still more concerned with Essos in the short run of the, I suppose, 100 years before the conquest. And that makes a lot of sense. They would have still had business interests and holdings, even though they lost what they had in Valyria. They may still have had activities or trade agreements or things like that with the other free cities. And so maybe the turning their attention to Westeros also involves, if we're looking at the magical side of this, maybe that involves contact with a green sea or something like that. One of them reaching out and getting into Aegon's dreams or something like that is possible. We obviously can't go too far with something like that, but it's fun to maybe guess at the possibilities of what maybe started them on this track, and if it was anything besides just conquest. Like if he wanted to, if he really did have it in mind to unite Westeros, it might explain some of his actions a little differently, at least a little bit. Like the way he went after Dorne and things like that. If he thought it was so necessary, a lot of these things a lot of different things that he did might require a second look or third look to maybe reconsider his motivations.
Yeah, and I think the last thing, we can come back to this subject, guys, if you're interested, we can come back to this in a bit. But the last thing I would sort of say on that is that in all of these things, we have to say, if this, then what? And I think that the way that we need to look at that, if this is true, what would we expect Aegon to be doing? If his focus for invading and he and his sisters for taking over was to protect against an attack from the north, do his later actions actually back that up? I would put it out there that obviously we'll learn a whole lot more when we actually see Fire and Blood, but he wasn't one of those kings who spent huge amounts of time going up to the north and thinking about how can we build the defenses, can we build new forts and all the rest of it. That was more, as we saw from an earlier extract from Fire and Blood, that was sort of Queen Alysanne and Jaehaerys, that they were the people who were actually building new forts. Aegon, we don't read huge amounts about this. It's almost as if he has this agreement with Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, and then that was it. He sort of was then building his kingdom, focusing in on King's Landing rather than building a huge defensive force against the north. So that would be my take. I don't think it quite adds up that this is exactly what he was trying to do from the beginning, and he was just trying to defend from the north, because that doesn't seem to add up with his actions later. But still, interesting stuff, and I think that we should give it some weight, but only the amount of weight that George R.R. Martin seems to be giving it, which seems to be many people have been speculating that. And, then, and that's the amount of weight that I think that we should give to it. He's entertaining the possibility, but he's not saying it's the truth yet. So as we're on dragons and Targaryens, we did have a couple of questions, and this is an open Q&A, so questions will be on pretty much anything. A couple of questions from my patrons. Brian Price was asking about what was Drogon doing in Old Valyria when Tyrion and Jorah were there. Was he laying eggs, perhaps? Now, this, if you remember, way back in, I can't remember which season it was, probably about 5, maybe, something like that, and you get Tyrion bound up in the boat and Jorah they're going through, and then they see the dragon flying overhead. It's a great scene, and it's had a lot of people just querying whether or not there is a particular reason why there might be a dragon, why it looked like Drogon was there. What do you reckon, Aziz? Do you reckon this is obviously is a show kind of thing, but do you think that he was laying eggs or something? Was it just ranging out, looking out over the territory?
I kind of doubt he laid eggs. It's certainly possible. There's no way to prove he didn't, of course. Yeah, like you said, this only happened on the show, but there's something similar that happened in the books that made me think of it, which is in The Princess and the Queen / The World of Ice and Fire, the bit about the Dance of the Dragons, we have Sunfire finding his way back to Dragonstone and finding his master, Aegon II, without any apparent direction of his own. He just sort of sensed it. It's almost like he went home. And I think that might have been what they were doing with the show there. They were showing Drogon kind of going, quote unquote, home, which in his case was be Valyria. Of course, he was born on the Dothraki Sea, really. So it wouldn't necessarily be his birthplace in this case on the show. But I think that maybe what they were doing, but also it was just kind of a cool way for them to show the dragon. And since they were showing us Valyria, a different version of Valyria from the books, yeah, it just added to the scene. It looked cool. I kind of doubt that they have any plans to like, if he was laying eggs, that would be sort of like an epilogue set up for some sort of, oh, there are some more dragons still. I don't really see them doing that. And if they did, I don't think they would have the dragon eggs be so far away. so over there in a weird place like that. So I just think it was a kind of a cool thing they did, but I think it did have a nod to the books in there as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that maybe Drogon was doing something we don't know about. Dragons are mysterious and they are their own creatures. They're not owned by people. But really, in terms of narrative, this was when Tyrion started to turn from being, oh yeah, okay, I'll go off and see who this strange queen is, to, whoa, hang on a moment. There actually is a huge dragon. This is quite a game changer. This changed his mindset about what he was going to go and see. So I think it was the scene was more about Tyrion than it was about the dragon. The dragon can be there probably just ranging around seeing what's going on. Yes, sure, it was a few hundred miles away from where it could have been, but dragons can fly quite quickly, as we had discovered last season in Game of Thrones. So yeah, I think this was more about Tyrion than about Drogon myself. We did just get a super chat from 9 Nichols. Thank you so much. Saying Blackfire gets darker after the funeral pyres. Aziz, do you? Sorry, I have to admit I'm struggling with the question.
That I believe that we were told that Blackfire darkened a bit because Aenys placed it into the pyre with Aegon, and then Balerion set it alight. And I think we were told that it got a little darker, which is interesting because it's already going to be pretty dark. So it would go from dark gray to darker gray or to black, I suppose. That's interesting. It's a kind of a small hidden detail there, and I wonder what it's supposed to mean, if anything. But it does kind of make Blackfire maybe a little more unique in terms of the Valyrian steel swords if it's a little bit darker looking. So it kind of lives up to its name in that sense, I suppose. But yeah, that's kind of neat. We haven't seen Blackfire on screen as far as we know, unless it's been disguised somehow. But it'd be hard to disguise it given its look. If it's really this super dark black blade, that would be kind of hard to conceal somewhere. So I wonder when basically what I'm thinking is if we get to see it one day, which I kind of think we will. I kind of think we'll see it in the Winds of Winter. That's a detail for us to be looking out for if anyone else notices that it's darker or anything like that. And I'm not sure I have any idea why that might be significant, but I think it's kind of neat. It's worth thinking about or keeping an eye out for more details.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a subscriber to the idea that Illyrio has Blackfire, and he's going to be giving it to Aegon. And it sort of thematically, the idea that this is darker, blacker than before is perhaps another one of these kind of hints that this is of the blacks, of the Blackfires, not the reds, the true Targaryens. And so actually what we've got here, and I know other people have got other views, but what we've got here in Fagon is a Blackfire heir or bastard who is being dressed up as a Targaryen heir. And so actually having a black sword, it is a changed sword from when it was the sword of the Targaryens. This is now a Blackfire sword, and I think it would be another thematic hint to that, would be where I would go.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, black dragon, black sword. Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. And we've got B1 Mary. Thank you so much. $20. That's very kind. Just some love for Robert and Aziz. Thank you for all your hard work and ideas. That's very kind. Thank you very much. While we're on dragons and the like, we had one other thing from one of my patrons, Cherim Miller, saying, hey Robert, I was hoping you guys could discuss what you both think the special ingredient or ingredients are required for hatching dragons, and the possibility that human sacrifice is the ingredient, and if it could be Targaryen blood or child sacrifice. And as a follow-up, is there a way that that's linked to the faceless men's religion? Well, let's leave the faceless men to one side for a moment. I'll start on this one, Aziz, and then if you can sort of pick up on it. So just taking the one instance that we have seen firsthand, as it were, of dragons being hatched, which is obviously when Dany's dragons are being hatched, it's pretty clear that there are a few things that had to happen. There had to be sacrifice, blood sacrifice. We saw, depending on which way you cut it, you've got a number of dead bodies. You've got Miri Maz-Dur, who died in the fire. You've got Khal Drogo, who died. You can talk about Rhaego, that Dany's stillborn son. You could even talk about Khal Drogo's horse if you want to. There are a number of deaths going on around there that are sacrifices. There's clearly fire. There's clearly an intention by Dany to be doing this, and there is also the red comet above. And as if LML were here, he would point out for us, I'm sure, that all magic comes from above, and moon meteors and the like. But it's very clear that this is at the very least a harbinger of magic, if not an actual enabler of magic in some way. So those seem to be the constituent parts of giving birth to dragons. Those are the magic ingredients. It strikes me that George R. R. Martin said something along these lines anyway, that instance was just this perfect storm of everything working exactly right at the same time. Where you had the red comet, you had some incredibly powerful people, if you like, dying, a magic user, Khal Drogo, the greatest Khal in the land. You had Rhaego dying, who was not just the son and heir of Khal Drogo, but the son and heir of Daenerys, the Targaryen queen. So we've got some incredibly powerful blood going on there, and all Targaryen magic was to do with fire and blood. So those seem to be the main ingredients. The exact way that they get mixed up may well change a little bit, but that's what we know. Is there anything else you'd want to sort of add on to that?
No, I don't. I think you covered it pretty well. I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, she had the dreams kind of filling in some of the instructions, so to speak, but maybe that's the only thing I would throw in. Maybe you even said that. It was a pretty thorough breakdown there.
Excellent. Well, in that case, I will give you first dibs at this next one. A super chat from Tyler Wooden. Thank you so much. Saying, off topic. There is no off topic when we're doing Q&A, so don't worry about that. Why is Edmure Tully so afraid of Jaime Singer in the tent outside of Riverrun?
Of course, the old floppy fish routine. Well, Edmure hates singers. He especially hates that particular singer, who is basically, there was an incident where Edmure was too drunk to perform for his lady, and word got out, and Thomas Evans wrote a song about it called The Floppy Fish. And well, I don't know if that's the name of the song, but that's how it's referred to. And it's pretty funny, but Edmure doesn't think so. It reminds him of his failing manhood in his moment of need. So he just doesn't like singers at all. It was he's just kind of done with that whole thing after his experience.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that poor Edmure doesn't really have the best of history with music and things like that as well. If you think of the Red Wedding, that doesn't go too well for him either. So yeah, it's on that occasion, I think you've answered that one as fully as I answered the previous one. So I think that probably puts us equal. Catherine Bassett, £5. Thank you so much. Saying, so in theory, fire and blood, being the main constituents of Targaryen magic, could have hatched dragons in Summerhall. Now, this is a fantastic question. So yes, in theory. Now, for those who don't know the sort of the background to this, so the tragedy at Summerhall, this was when Aegon the Fifth, who we know of at the moment as Egg, he died eventually there, and he called everyone together for a number of reasons, to celebrate the birth of grandchild and things like that. But one of the things was because he had become obsessed with hatching dragon eggs, and he seemed to think that he knew how to do it. And what we know is that there was this great inferno. Something went wrong. There was this great inferno at Summerhall. It all burnt down. And that, intriguingly, obviously means that there was fire. It also obviously means that there are deaths. And we learn of, again, intriguingly, 3 deaths again. We've got Aegon, who died, king. We get Duncan, his son, and we get Sir Duncan the Tall. So we got 3 impressive deaths again. So if we're just looking at it on face value, yes, we get some sacrifice, we get some fire. That's the kind of thing that we might theoretically see giving birth to dragons. Now, at some point, I'm going to do a whole video on what I think was going on at Summerhall, but I think that at the very least, there is a thematic thing which happened there, which is that when that happened and you had the fire and you had the blood, you had the birth of Rhaegar, a dragon. So thematically, at the very least, that's what happened, was with the fire and the blood did result in Rhaegar being born. And that was obviously, he is then very much bound up in prophecy and the like. So he is magical in and of himself. So that's there. But Aziz, do you think that beyond that thematic level, do you think that actual dragons might have been born or created at Summerhall?
No, I doubt it. I think that they gave it their best try, but I don't think that they had a great chance of doing it, because they don't seem to have quite had all the necessary ingredients. We're told that wildfire is the next hottest thing known to mankind after dragonfire, but that is saying that it's not quite as hot. And there may be more to it than just the heat. But yeah, I don't think so. George told us that what happened with Dany was essentially a miracle. So I don't know that you can engineer a miracle on your own, and especially if you don't have the right ingredients. And it seems like they didn't quite have that. It seems like they were close, but yeah, wildfire instead of dragon flame. I don't think that particular substitute was gonna work, but maybe it could have, but it clearly didn't, in my opinion. It looks like it was a complete disaster, and I don't think that anything got out of there alive other than a few people who were saved by Duncan. Obviously, Rhaegar survived, Aerys survived, and Rhaella, a lot of the family survived. But I believe if a dragon had been born, that would have been something that would have been noticed and mentioned by those survivors. There were enough of them to have seen something like that.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting that Dany's dragons survived for quite a long time without food, without nurture, and huge amounts. So a baby dragon being born there would have had to be killed by someone. So if we're saying that a dragon was born there, we have to say that somebody deliberately, or was hatched there. We are saying that somebody deliberately then killed the dragon afterwards, because they wouldn't have been killed by the fire, and they would have survived for a little while afterwards, because we saw that with Dany's dragons. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't think that the dragons were hatched. I think there was a lot of extra layers going on there that I'm going to dig into at some point, but I don't think that a dragon was actually hatched. A couple of other super chats. Thanks, guys. This is great. B1 Mary, $15. That's very kind. Sorry, thought of something. What do you think about the fact that the Starks are the only ones that always took women into their line and didn't give their women to expand other family lines? That's interesting. That's not something I've actually really thought about. Obviously, Lyanna was given to, she was planned to be given to the Baratheons, so to speak, in that very patriarchal way that they had, and then did, if not marry herself off, then certainly get together with Rhaegar. So that happened in that at that time. But going back, Aziz, you are Mr. History of Westeros. Is there Are there other Starks, female Starks, who have gone out into other families, or is this a general hard and fast rule?
Yeah, we've seen Starks go into other families. It's only recently that, as far as we know, that they were looking outside of the North. There were probably some exceptions before, but it seems that there were certainly marriages with some of, at least one family that we know of is the Royces, that there was a marriage to the Starks, and there was a Royce marriage coming. The Royces, a Royce married into the Stark family, and we're pretty sure there was a vice versa, and there was certainly a Dreadfort Redfort connection. Beyond the naming scheme. So I believe there was also a Stark Lannister marriage maybe 100 years back. I got to double check that one. That one might be just a bump in my head. But there's a lot of opportunities for such a thing, especially because we're talking about such a long period of time. And there's so many marriages we're not aware of. It's hard to be sure that everything we don't know is all pointing in the same direction as what we have seen. So it's not necessarily a pattern. It may just be a pattern of what we've seen in recent times. Because if we're looking back before the conquest, for example, we have almost nothing on Stark marriages, and it's hard for us to make any assumptions on what might or might not have happened then.
Yeah, I think that's worth pointing out, is that there are millennia of Starks that we don't know huge amounts about, and we don't have lots of information. In fact, we don't actually have huge amounts of information from Rickard Stark backwards. We know a few odds and ends here. We don't even know the name of his wife particularly. The parents there. It starts getting very murky very quickly. So, but this kind of knowledge about intermarriage with the Royces, this is why we have Aziz on. He is the reigning Game of Thrones, I think, undefeated Game of Thrones quiz champion. That's why we have him on. Jack Hurst, thank you very much. £5. Alex Sandu had a good question. I love it, by the way. I've said this before. I love it when people do super chats on behalf of other people. I know not everyone can do super chats, and if there's great questions and somebody picks it out and asks, does a super chat on behalf of someone else, that's amazing. I love it. So thank you so much, Jack, and also Alex, for the question. What about all the other Targaryen dragons with eggs in the crib? Where was the blood sacrifice there? Now, I think this is referring to the habit of the Targaryens, the later Targaryens at least, to be putting dragon eggs in the cribs of baby Targaryen. So Egg talked about the fact that he'd had one in his crib and so on. And now these were, and I'd love to know, Aziz, if you know of this tradition going back even further, but at that point, these were dragon eggs that had not hatched and would not hatch. So these were being placed there almost symbolically, almost to say that you are blood of the dragon, you are a dragon because there's this dragon egg in there with you. And that was the idea, that they could sort of almost bond with the dragon egg while they were still a baby. These were almost certainly the eggs that Aegon V then tried to hatch at Summerhall. So that is what we think happened with them. It's quite a quick journey from there being lots of dragons at the time of the Dance of the Dragons to there being no dragons. Just a couple of generations later, in fact, they just stopped hatching, and that's what these eggs here were. Aziz, do you know if that was a long-term practice that went on even earlier?
I believe it was not. I heard you mention briefly that that the later Targaryens did it, and I think there's some evidence against it happening before that, because, for example, Aenys Targaryen, the second king, he was given a dragon when he was crawling, when he was a few years old. And there's no mention of him having an egg, and there's no mention of that being the egg that hatched out of his crib, if he's had one. And Maegor apparently didn't seem to have one either. He had Balerion eventually. There was no bonding with any of the other dragons, and it sounded like he had all these choices and he didn't want them. He wanted Balerion only. So it was never as if he just had this one assigned to him at birth with an egg, because that's kind of how it went before, or went afterwards. We're not sure when that changed. I'm not really sure when this habit developed, or maybe I'm wrong and maybe they did do this from an earlier point. But if I had to guess, I would say no. And I think that maybe some point around after the Dance of the Dragons would be when this started, or maybe before. We have, for example, one of Prince Daemon's daughters prayed over her egg and slept with it. And that, to me, is the first similar sort of connection to having it in your crib, is someone that's keeping the egg with them at all times. And maybe it happened after the dragon stopped hatching, because I think before they just would hatch on their own. They didn't seem to need, the Targaryens didn't have to do anything. They would just hatch on their own. They were animals. Their eggs hatch the way eggs hatch. It just works. You don't have to do anything to make your to make eggs out in the world hatch normally. They do it on their own. So I think that was something changed in it, and that's the what is a huge mystery. Maybe so many dragons dying at once had some sort of impact on the magical forces of the world. Who knows what to call that? But yeah, I think it's I think this is something we might learn in Fire and Blood. This is something I'm looking forward to maybe sussing out. I would guess that if it's not in the description of the post Dance of the Dragons stuff, then we may not get it until Fire and Blood Part 2, which that'll be a long time from now. So we may not get an answer to that this time, but I hope we at least get a few more data points to play with and maybe make some better guesses.
Yeah, and that's a really valid point about Fire and Blood Part 2. We can't assume Fire and Blood Part 1 is going to answer all of our Targaryen related questions, because it won't. It's only doing half the history. The later stuff, and a lot of the stuff that will have a lot of the questions that we really want answering, all of the stuff about Bloodraven and Aegon and things like that, that is going to be in Part 2. So Part 1 is more of the earlier Targaryens. So we may not get answers to everything. Geese Mulders, I apologize. I have probably completely butchered your name. $10. Thank you very much. Love this channel. Thank you. Question: what kind of undead is Robert Strong / the Mountain? Ice or Fire White or something else? Qyburn doesn't seem affiliated with any faction. No, I would agree with you. I think he is something else. I did a video on this a while ago, actually. If you're interested, couple of videos related. One of them was a character study of Qyburn himself, and another one was about the nature of death and resurrection in A Song of Ice and Fire. I came to the conclusion that Qyburn had got onto something. He's effectively a scientist, and he understood the nature, or something of the nature, of life and death, and more specifically what lingers of life after death in the world of Ice and Fire. And he uses this, when he's talking to Jaime, he uses this story of, if you go into a room and you see a chair with a kind of a little dent in it where someone's been sitting, and there's the smell in the air of somebody, you know somebody has used to be there. They're not there anymore, but the something about them has lingered. Their presence has lingered, and that is what he is trying to capture. So when he has been creating the mountain, he has been applying his science to try and grab hold of what it is that lingers, which incidentally is across the piece in A Song of Ice and Fire. This is what we see with Lady Stoneheart. Something of her was lingering with Beric Dondarrion. Something of him was lingering. A bit more went away each time he came back. Lady Stoneheart, not much of her was left because she'd been gone for so long, and so on and so forth. And what Qyburn was doing was taking this nature of reality and actually making what I would call a science white. That's probably not a game, not a name which is going to catch on with many other people, but that's how I understand it. He has created a new type of white, not one which is resurrected by fire magic, not one which is resurrected by ice magic, but one which is resurrected by science magic, as it were. So that's what I think is going on. I think it's a different case. And interestingly, I'll go across to Aziz in a moment, because I'm sure he'll have some good points on this one. Interestingly, we shouldn't see, as we do at the moment, the mountain as being a one-off. Qyburn, I am convinced, will see him as a prototype. This is him proving that he can do what he thought he could do. Now he knows how to do it. He can do other stuff. He can create more. So do not expect it to end there. But Aziz, what are your thoughts on the mountain in terms of what he is?
Well, I love the term science white, and I see that Lucifer LML here in the chat has called it pseudoscience white, which is also really good. I think you covered that pretty well. There's one thing I would throw in there. I definitely agree there's a chance he'll make more, and I also think there's a chance that he will lose control of his one or multiple creations if something, stronger comes along. Say the others or something like that. Well, I don't know who else, but the others that's really it. That's all we need. But one thing I think is kind of neat as far as the lore behind what he's done. He named the creature the undead beast, which I like to call him the Kyborg. But he's like he was the one place that Qyburn was accepted as a maester was with the Brave Companions, and then he was kind of let loose in Harrenhal for a while. And Harrenhal was once ruled by House Strong, and so I think it's maybe not a coincidence that he named him Robert Strong, because he had access to Harrenhal's library, whereas he didn't probably have access to other castle libraries before that, because he was kicked out of the Citadel before he became a maester, so he would never have had the chance to peruse other castle libraries without, unless the Brave Companions, broke into another castle and he got to look at something like that. But that wouldn't be on the level of Harrenhal, a big castle with a history of black magic. For example, the Lostons had some stories there about black magic. So you can think that maybe something in the books that he learned at Harrenhal was the missing piece for him, or something that took him to the next level to enable him to do what he did. And I like to, that's my headcanon, that he the missing pieces to his experiments he found at Harrenhal. And I'm not sure we'll ever get any confirmation on that, but it seems to fit pretty well. It's a cool story, bro. So I hope we do get more on that. It would be really cool. And if we see more of Qyburn's creations, there's a good chance we'll learn a bit more about how that came to be. And I just hope like Varys or someone doesn't kill him off too quickly before he gets to talk and explain some things. But I don't think Varys is going to want him to stick around. Varys doesn't like magic. Varys is kind of in his place. He kind of has his job, so to speak. And the TV show kind of, if it goes at all like the TV show in the books, then that's what we're headed towards. So, I mean, Qyburn is still alive in the show, but but obviously Varys is, he's going to make some moves, I think. So we'll see.
Yeah, I like the idea that he got some extra knowledge at Harrenhal. There's we don't need to go into a rich history there of people meeting unfortunate ends and potentially dabbling in things they shouldn't be dabbling in. Chikzula Rob, again, I apologize for probably butchering your name. Love you both. I'm sad to say I have to wait until tomorrow to truly enjoy this, but I certainly look forward to it. Remember the snow in Winterfell. Thank you so much for the super chat. Good to see you. Sunny Day Tea Factory saying, please corroborate timeline. White Walkers created with no leader, then the Long Night, Wall, and the Night's Watch born after victory. 13th Lord Commander becomes the Night's King first leader, ? Okay, so this is a question of can we confirm the exact chronology of what happened in terms of the creation of the White Walkers, the others, the Wall, the Night's Watch, the 13th Lord Commander? The short answer is we can't exactly, because George R.R. Martin has been very clear that this happened thousands of years ago, and everything that's happened there we should treat as legend, as myth. It shouldn't be exact. But patching together the things that we've got there seems to have been the creation of the White Walkers. Certainly we see in the show, we see the creation of the White Walkers seems to be by the Children of the Forest when they were in conflict with humanity. So that seems to have happened way back in time, assuming something similar happens in the books, but we haven't yet got confirmation of that. Then we get the Long Night and the pushback and the creation of the during that period we get the creation of the Night's Watch. We have Bran the Builder, who builds the wall, and then we have the 13th Lord Commander, which implies that this was a period of time, not a huge period of time, that might just be 100 years or so, give or take, who knows. The 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch became this, again, mythological Night's King. So that's the sort of the overarching timeline we've got. We can't take it too tightly, because we've been told we can't take it too tightly. It seems to me that the Night's Watch happened during the Long Night, I think, rather than afterwards. That's just my personal take, but you could interpret it either way. We also have to remember that the wall started out not as this massive thing we've got going on here, but actually a normal-sized wall, and the real barrier is a magical barrier. It's just later generations of Lord's Commander just built up and built up and built up to turn it into what we have now. So, Aziz, is there anything you or your cat wish to
add? He has a lot to say, but not the ability to say it. So we'll just have to use our imagination. He likes to be, picked up and manhandled. Out of my way, buddy. So, what was the question?
What's the timeline of creation of the White Walkers, the building of the wall, the Night's King, all of that?
Of course. Okay, so I think George definitely wants that to be a mystery. Like you said, there's in the shroud of thousands of years of unknown history and an unknown number of years. It may not be as many thousands as we think. It's possible that it's more. I think that what makes the most sense to me is that there was no wall, and because of the others invading, they built it because they didn't know if they would ever come back. If you picture a society like ancient Westeros that's just barely defeated this great ancient evil that supposedly, or maybe it wasn't ancient back then, but this evil that's threatening to wipe out humanity, they probably felt, well, we beat it, but they don't necessarily know where it came from. They don't necessarily know what triggered it. They don't necessarily know what's going to make it come back again. So the best thing they can do is build a barrier in case it does. They don't know if it comes back in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years. And of course, we're picturing a society without writing. They can't write it down. Hey, guys, make sure you have protection against this. 100, for people to pick up this book and read it 500 years later, that wouldn't be possible. So it could only be told through these runes, but mostly through word of mouth. And because of that, you'd think that it would be a pretty big deal. That it would be this ancient thing that almost wiped everybody out. They would really be on concerned about that possibility, and they would have to deal with it any way they could. And I think that it makes sense that they would form this organization to deal with it in case it came back, but they didn't get it right at first, meaning they had the right attitude to form the Night's Watch and build a wall and all that, but they didn't understand what could go wrong with that power structure. For example, I think the whole idea of them not having kids, the whole idea that they couldn't have wives, I think that probably came later. That may have been a response to what happened with the 13th Lord Commander, because he got power went to his head for whatever reason. Maybe there was magic involved. There probably was. But even if there wasn't, even if it's just a myth where the magic is kind of added in after the fact, he took power that he wasn't supposed to have. And so I think that the laws of the Night's Watch reflect making sure that doesn't happen again, making sure that power is managed properly, making sure the Night's Watch has its focus, has its purpose, and nothing interferes with that, and that no power-hungry person could subvert it. And as we've seen, it's pretty hard to subvert. Jon is wary of his own moves here, and it obviously backfired on him. So the Night's Watch takes that seriously, and that might be because of something big in the past that led them to need to take it so seriously.
Yeah, and if you want a bit more on that, I see the Disputed Lands in the chat. Hi there, Amanda. She was on, I think, probably a couple of months ago, and we had a really good chat about the Night's Watch oath, and she broke down, I think, really quite eloquently and interestingly how you can see that as being done probably in two different parts. There's a couple of different fields. There's a statement of who you are, there's a promise as well, and these kind of things suggest that perhaps it was done in two parts, and so perhaps the role of the Night's Watch did change over time. So do go and check that one out if you fancy it. Super chats are coming thick and fast, guys. Thank you so much for this. I'm struggling to keep up at the moment, which is a good problem to have, but
yes.
we'll try to pick up the pace. Brian Price, thank you so much. Also a patron of mine. Do you think Joffrey ever thought to act against Tywin, given their tension? Tywin always looked confident. Did he have complete control over the King's Guard and other guards, do you think? My take on this is I think Joffrey was trying to... there were a few people Joffrey wanted to impress, and I think Tywin was one of them. I think that actually when he got older, if Tywin was still doing what he was doing, I could well see he might make a move against him. But Tywin was so much his superior in terms of understanding how things worked. He always looked confident because he was epically competent, is the way I would see it, is that he was all over the details of things. He could run things because he knew what was going on all the time, and the thing which finally caught him out was a thing which he could not anticipate, which is, let's face it, not one but both of his sons going against his orders, and that was what was his undoing in the end. But is there what do you think? Do you think Joffrey ever did think to act against Tywin?
I agree with you. I think it's something that he might have considered if he was older, but at his age, he didn't have anyone that was like his crony yet. He had it was kind of an interesting thing that Tywin did when he put him in his place that one time, because it really showed where the power really lies. Sure, Joffrey has the throne, and when he's yelling and screaming and wants something, there's a decent chance he's going to get it. But if he wants something really absurd, really out of line, for the most part, he's not going to get it unless it's arranged in a certain way. Like, for example, say getting Ned's head cut off, because he announced that to a crowd in a way that you couldn't really back out of, right? And he didn't want to back out of it, even when people tried to reason with him. So there's that. But yeah, like if he tells one of his Kingsguard to attack Tywin, I just don't think they'll do it. I think they'd be like, Your Grace, they'd hem and haw something. I mean, we saw Sandor wouldn't even beat Sansa. There's some of the Kingsguard one of the Kingsguard was willing to stand up to him, and Aerys Oakheart was kind of backed off a little bit. So we even saw shades of people disobeying him. But even those things, it was mostly like what Tyrion said. If he wants you to saddle his horse, saddle his horse. If he wants you to kill his horse, come talk to me or his mom. And if Tyrion says that to them about a horse, yeah, they're not going to just kill Tywin. So I think that unless he started to get himself some of his own men, he didn't really have his own people that would do his bidding. Like Tyrion had his clansmen and Bronn and things like that, even though technically there were people that were above Tyrion that those guys had to answer to. They were really Tyrion's men. So Joffrey didn't have his own men, really. He just thought everyone was his man because that was how he thought. But we know better.
We do. Higa Herga, thank you so much for your super chat. Excellent question. Any thoughts on the death of Hardhome, since it could be seen burning from the wall? circa 300 or minus 300 AC. It couldn't be the others. What the heck happened? So for those who don't know, Hardhome, which we saw on the show, in that great battle scene when Jon goes up and tries to rescue the wildlings in the boats, that was largely an abandoned settlement, because 300 years before Aegon's conquest, there had been some huge fire. It's a mystery. People don't seem to know what happened. And this fire was said to be so great you could see it from the wall, hundreds of miles away. And then bits of sort of ash were dropping down again, hundreds of miles away in another direction. And we don't get any explanation for this. This is just a thing which happened. So the short answer is we don't know for sure what's happened. I've seen some interesting theories that perhaps this is. I saw one where maybe the Faceless Men were practicing blowing up old Valyria. I guess it could be, but then why then if they figured out how to do it, wait 200 years before actually doing it? So that one doesn't quite add up for me. I think it's one of those things where the boring answer may actually be the correct one, which is that there might have just been some raiders who just burned the city down. We hear that survivors got taken away as slaves. That seems to imply that there were boats hanging around there somewhere. So that for me is the most likely solution. But maybe there was something else. Aziz, in your times trawling through the forums, have any of the random theories struck you and made you go, oh, maybe it was that?
Not really. I think I'm with you that I'm not a big fan of the Faceless Man dry run theory. I think you're right that why would they have waited so long, and what if it really required some of the things that people think it would require, like a dragon egg or something like that. Yeah, I don't know that they would do a dry run if they only had one bullet, so to speak. So yeah, it's certainly possible, but it's kind of up there in those, just one of those mysteries that's really, really hard to explain, that we may need more information on. Similar ones, I would say, like the incident with the Bridge of Dream, where they passed the same spot twice, which is just, okay, what on earth? What just happened? It's undeniable what happened, but the why is completely impenetrable. And with Hardhome, we just do not have much information at all. It is a really vague story that, yeah, it does sound like it's on the surface, it just sounds like a volcano. But why? Why did he write that? There's got to be something. And you're right. I haven't heard any theory. I've seen several theories, but none of them are really seem really strong. They seem like, okay, well, that's possible, but to me, several of them are a little too high magic, maybe. Another one that's up there for me is Victarion's new burned arm, and the way the chapter changes perspective and all that. And that one, I think we'll get more explanation on, because it's still going. We still have the guy who did it. He's still around. Makora's still probably going to do other interesting things. So, the Bridge of Dream, I don't think we'll ever get an answer on. I don't think there's any reason for that to be brought up again. But Hardhome, there's a chance we get more, because it's obviously plenty of things are happening in the north, and but we might be about to get to the point where it's impossible to go beyond the wall if it's just too cold, or so many possibilities. It's really hard to say. I'm very curious, though. I love that someone asked this question, because it's really, really one of those things that's so hard to penetrate at this point. So hopefully we get more answers.
Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating, but we just do not have the information yet, so I'm not going to pretend that we do. At this point, halfway through, I always take a very quick pause just to let people know stuff that's coming up on my channel. First of all, I say every time, patrons, thank you. I cannot do this without you. There are going to be some goodies coming up for patrons over the course of the next 2 or 3 days. A couple of things I promised a while ago and didn't quite get the time to do, but some extra special bonus materials coming patrons' way very soon. If you're interested in supporting the channel or getting access to those bits, so there'll be extra bits of audio, please do check out the link down in the description to my Patreon page. Other than that, Fire and Blood is out on Tuesday. Fire and Blood Part 1. I will spend all of Tuesday and probably a goodly bit of Wednesday reading my way through it, and then the videos will start coming. My patrons, another thing that patrons get to do is every now and then, $10 and above patrons get to help decide what I cover, and they helped me decide how much of my time I was going to be devoting to Fire and Blood, and the answer is quite a lot. So I'm going to be doing videos on all of the main characters, the kings, and the big scenarios coming up. I'll be doing videos on them, and probably 2 or 3 live streams as well, just to cover off a few other issues. So that's a lot of stuff that'll take through November and December, possibly into the new year as well. So I'll be doing a lot on that. And the other thing, my second channel, The Well Told Tale, we're coming to the end of Frankenstein. For those who don't know, that is a channel just of me reading audiobooks, what I consider to be the finest stories ever written. We're coming to the end. We've got one more episode of Frankenstein, so that's going to finish off. And again, my patrons over for The Well Told Tale, they will be deciding what we do after that. So Aziz, what's coming up for you? Is there anything you particularly want to draw people's attention to?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. We just did our Nymeria Part 2 video. It's not out yet. Shay is done with her edits. I'm almost done with mine. So we'll have that up for patrons, I think, tomorrow, possibly very late tonight. Excuse me. Then we're kind of doing a similar thing to you, which is we're going to be covering a lot of Fire and Blood stuff. That'll be the focus. And we've got a planned collaboration with Radio Westeros regarding the Dance of the Dragons. We've planned that for quite a while, and we decided we wanted to wait to have all the information we could. And this is probably going to be about all the information we get for maybe ever on the Dance of the Dragons. So this is the time to cover it. That's how we're going to start, and then we're going to let our fans and patrons kind of decide where we go from there. In addition to wrapping up the series two series that we have going. We have a Blood Raven series to wrap up, and Nymeria is going to require a 3rd episode as well. So lots of cool stuff coming, and we're excited to deliver it.
Good. And I probably should have said this at the beginning, but I'm not sure whether I put it in yet. But if you're watching this not live, then there will be a link to History of Westeros down there in the description of this video afterwards. I would highly recommend it. It's one of the best channels on the background, the history, and the greater world, the lore of A Song of Ice and Fire that you will find out there. Aziz is, I've mentioned it a few times, one of the people who has got the greatest knowledge of what is going on. So please do go check that out if you can. I'm sure the mods, hi mods, thank you so much for doing a great job. I'm sure the mods will put a link into the chat if you are watching live. But let's go back quickly, because I obviously cut away from the super chats just before LML's question. So LML, apologies for that one. $6.66, an appropriate super chat amount from Lucifer means Lightbringer. To me, he says, it makes the most sense if the Night's King probably lived during the Long Night instead of after. Then everything else makes more sense. He leads the White Walkers during the Long Night, etc. Yeah, I think you've talked about that on this channel before, actually, and I think I was quite convinced by your logic on that one. Yes, it does make sense of that rather than having various iterations of it. This seems to be part of a shared memory of a traumatic event that happened that we're getting lots of different stories from, rather than something that happened in different, lots of staggered over a number of years. Aziz, would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a solid theory, a solid way of looking at things. And it also makes sense to me that there's a possibility the Night's Watch was formed during the War for the Dawn rather than, say, just after, as a way to prevent it from happening again. And well, I just saw myself on screen and realized how bright half my room is, how dark the other half is. That's really quite distinct. Anyway. Well,
you're getting so Kid 28 is giving you a little bit of Positive feedback though. Loving the shirt.
Well, thanks.
$10 super chat. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, Robert. Aziz, love the shirt. Have you watched Joe Magician's Killing of a Ranger video yet? And do you think the others view Jon as Azor Ahai or the prince that was promised? Now, I had Joe Magician actually on last week, and he was excellent. So if you want to go back and check that one out, we didn't explicitly talk about that, but I've mentioned that video a couple of times. I think it's probably one of the best new. So it's not really a new theory, but into a different angle of looking at things. A chance to go back to the prologue of Game of Thrones and just try and get under the skin of what are the others actually doing and what are they looking for. And the theory there is that they were actively looking for someone who looks a bit like Jon does or a Stark does, and they stumbled across the wrong person. Have you seen that video? Did you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have, and yeah, I agree with what you said about Joe as well. In general, I mean, he's got an interesting way of looking at some maybe not existing theories, some existing theories, some new theories in different ways, and having some different takes on them. So I think that's really cool. I'm not sure I agree with the conclusion of the theory that they were looking for someone in particular, because what we know is that the others have been active for a while prior to finding Waymar, and what they seem to be doing is scaring people. They let Garrett go on purpose. They let other Rangers go on purpose. What we hear from Mormont after the execution of Will is that, or after the execution of Garrett, sorry, it's Will on the show, is that this has happened several times already. Mormont tells Tyrion that it's been happening. Several men have, or maybe not Tyrion, he says it, I forget to who, that this has been happening, that several men have run off in fear and deserted. And Garrett, the fact that Garrett did it is a huge deal, because he's a 40-year veteran of the Wall. He's not a guy that's easily scared. And so there's definitely a strategy there. The others know what they're doing. They're not just randomly scaring Rangers and going home to have tea. So I think that they're trying to terrify people. I think that's, to me, is the simplest answer. Is they let Garrett go on purpose, and they let some of these other Rangers go on purpose, because it doesn't really make sense to me that that Garrett could just get away unless they wanted him to, because they had those guys trapped. They had them, Waymar just led them in deep into big doo-doo there, and there was no really getting away unless they wanted them to get away. I don't think that he just got away because they couldn't catch him. So to me, that says they're letting these guys get away who are terrified, so that it terrifies the realm. Now, why, I don't know. I don't know why they're doing that, but I'm not sure there's enough evidence to point to them looking for a specific person. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're not, but I don't know that that's what we're seeing here in this first scene.
Yeah, I think what we do have a hint of is that perhaps they are aware that there are things like Valyrian steel swords, and there are things that can actually take them on, because they certainly do seem to be pleased when they see that he just draws a normal sword, in as much as the others can be pleased. But it strikes me that what we've got there is that they will be wary. They know that normal swords don't affect them. That's not an issue. So I think that it's hang on a moment, this looks like a noble. This might be something different. Actually, no, he's not. He's just like a normal. So I think that that's as good and easy an explanation as where Joe came out at. But I wouldn't discount it completely. I think that the thing that came out for me most rereading that the prologue in the light of that video was the clear links that are there between the others and the woods. And I think that for me is something that I hadn't picked up on as much as perhaps I could have done. It's clearly come out on the show with the link between the Children of the Forest and the White Walkers, but here right away in the prologue, there are clear thematic links between the woods and the others. Rebecca Belloc, $10. Thank you so much. Dragonstone was an important trading port before the Targs fled Valyria, but by A Song of Ice and Fire, it seems just a poor fishing village. When did the downfall happen? After the Doom, after the Conquest? Now, this is an interesting one, and it's the kind of thing that I suspect that Aziz will have some good knowledge on. But in terms of when the Targaryens took it on, it was when we say it's an important trading port. What it was an strategically important place which controlled access up the big estuary that leads to what is now King's Landing. So that's why it was important. Now, when the Targaryens took it over, they turned this more into their personal palace, their personal home than anything else. So it became less important in terms of other stuff like that. When they moved over to King's Landing grew, and that became a trading port. So actually, Dragonstone became just an island with a great castle palace on it, and what else was there was servicing the Targaryens effectively. So we see a change in what it is over time, rather than a downfall of a place. I think it's just it changed the nature of what it was. But have you got any sort of knowledge of the town around, or the port around Dragonstone?
Well, I think one of the big differences is that there was more trading established on Driftmark. On the House Valyrian's port became really important, and it probably wasn't as big initially. Dragonstone was settled first, and the Valyrian port ports, really, there were multiples until later, were established only after the Targaryens moved, because the Valyrians came with the Targaryens. Of course, we know Dragonstone was a thing before the Targaryens kind of took it for themselves. So I think that was part of it. I think they lost some revenue competing that way, but the main thing would be King's Landing itself. King's Landing didn't exist, and once it was founded, it grew really fast. It only took about 25 years to be the third largest city in Westeros. And then not long after, it was the biggest. So I think that's what it was. Trade, just Dragonstone predated King's Landing and Driftmark. And then both of those things became pretty major, especially King's Landing. So I think it was just like it's imagine that you live in a small town, and the local coffee shop is where everybody goes, but then a Starbucks opens up, and then another Starbucks opens up. So all of a sudden, people are going to 3 different places, and it's not, they're not the only game in town anymore. So I think that's a big part of it. They just lack of, or they didn't have competition at first, and then all of a sudden they had a lot of competition.
Yeah, I agree. So things change over time, and the usage of places changes over time, and I think that is the main thing. So I think sort of downfall is probably the wrong way of looking at it. But thanks, Aziz. I think that was really helpful, particularly with drift markets. It's a thing we don't tend to think about, because it's not Dragonstone, it's not King's Landing, but there are a lot of other on the east of Westeros. There are a lot of places that are important for trading with the east, with Essos. Anime lover Nicole, €10. Thank you so much. What do you think about Dany Flint? Do you believe what happens in the song, or that she married the 13th Lord Commander, but she got killed to get to him, or something like that? So, guys, these questions are wonderfully random and all over the place. I love it. So Dany Flint is a legend, a character that I think we don't have huge amounts of knowledge about. The story which we have in a song, I think, is that she dressed up as a boy in order to join the Night's Watch, but then I think it came to a tragic end. I think she was raped and killed. I think that's what happened. I think that's the limit of what we really know. Aziz may well, with his superior knowledge, give us a few extra verses from it, but is there some extra to that legend that is escaping my memory, Aziz?
Well, there's one fun tidbit that I'm not exactly sure how to manage it, but I think it's relevant, which is that Danny Flint, the name, the idea of a girl dressing up like a boy, it reminds us of a few characters, but in particular Arya. And Arya's great grandmother was Arya Flint. So I wonder if there's any sort of, if that's meant to be a familial nod there, as well as being foreshadowing potentially. It's not popular for me to say, but I don't think Arya is going to survive the series. So I don't think she's going to have an end like Danny Flint, though. That's not going to be like that. So, and I don't think she's going to try to join the Night's Watch either. But, yeah, there's a lot of different little pieces there that maybe add up to some additional foreshadowing. But it's hard to say whether this is just a coincidence, whether there's some names that are kind of overlapping, or whether there's more to it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with, in terms of the books with Arya. I think they might cop out with her on the show, but in terms of the books, I think I'm with you. I think that her character arc ends in death, and identity is the other thing that comes through with her. I could completely see with her warging full time into Nymeria, and that is her end. But she's not going to be living a happy life in a castle somewhere. That's not what's going to happen to her. But in terms of this question, this is a legend. It's a song. It's quite a there's quite a few stories like that in our world. So I think this is just a little padding out of something that George R.R. Martin is just adding extra bits of flavor and life into the story. I agree. There are some bits of foreshadowing about girls dressing up, pretending to be boys. There's the Arya link. I don't think personally that we should take this too literally or too seriously. This is, again, it's another legend, it's another story, it's a song, it's something which has been passed down to us to give us a flavor of things, and to hint that girls can get dressed up as boys, and maybe that's not always a good thing, that they might not always get away with it, as it were. So I hope that answers your question. I think the answer is that we don't, particularly with the Lord Commander thing, that's speculation that we add on to it rather than anything else. Vorian Betterfetter, great name, $12.34. Evening, gents. That kid who Baelor made High Septon for a bit, what do you think happened to him? 8 years old in the last few years of Baelor's rule. Guys, I do this a lot, but Aziz, what happened to him?
Well, we were told he was a simpleton. He was a boy who could work miracles with stone or something like that. So I imagine they just kind of let him go back to being an artist and just kind of let him be alone. I don't think there would be any reason to have him killed. I doubt he had any secrets. I doubt he had any family that was trying to do anything politically that other people wouldn't like. I kind of think it was probably just let's just try to forget about that. Let's just shuffle that off to the side. I maybe send him to a sept or something like that, or just put him to work at the Great Sept or something like that, doing some work. Yeah, I kind of doubt anything interesting happened to him. Although I do think he's interesting as a parallel, because Bran is a bit of a parallel to Baelor the Blessed, and the 8-year-old simpleton as his companion is kind of a parallel to Hodor. Maybe kind of a cross between Hodor and Jojen or something like that. But yeah, and there's a lot of other little parallels between them, but that's kind of beside the point.
Yeah, so I mean, I would agree with this. I think that it's a little incidental in the history that we have here. And I think the most likely answer is he just got shuffled to one side in history. When you get institutions across the piece, when somebody is where they shouldn't be, then they just get pushed aside and left somewhere, and written out almost of history. And so it's just a footnote to show us a bit about other characters, rather than who he was in particular. There's nothing special about him. It's showing us more about Baelor and people like that. Maura Lee, $20. Thank you so much. Nicola's question again. This is picking up on someone else's question. I love it when people do that. Is the Night Queen a Stark kidnapped by Night King? By the Night King. I assume that's not by Night King Robert. That will be adding in another layer to it. So is the Night Queen a Stark kidnapped by the Night King? So this is very much, I think I'll interpret this as a book question in terms of the Night's King rather than the Night King, although there almost certainly is a link there between the two, I think. But the legend we have is that, as Old Nan would say, is that the Night King himself was probably the Stark. Might have been someone else, but he probably was a Stark. He was the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and we know that the Starks have this strong link across to the Night's Watch, so that makes a whole lot of sense. The Night's Queen was this woman who appeared to be an other, who came from beyond the wall, and the Night's King fell in love with her. So it's not that she was a Stark. She was a Stark kidnapped by the Night King. It's more that he was a Stark who got enraptured by her. At least that's the story we're told. We shouldn't necessarily take this as literal, but that's the way that it's kind of put across to us. I think that as we were talking earlier, as Alamal pointed out, I think there's a good chance that this actually happened within the Long Night. And so actually this isn't a thing which happened afterwards. This might well have been an event there that actually the leader of the others appeared to be or was somebody who had a close association with one of the leaders of the Night's Watch. So there's something going on there, but it doesn't seem to have been that the Night Queen was a Stark specifically. In fact, probably the other way around. Aziz, have you got anything to add to that one?
I don't think so. I think you got that pretty well covered. Yeah, we can move on to the next one.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to quickly get onto a few of my patrons' questions.
Cool.
So we've got. Let's go to. We've been talking a lot about the wall, and dragons and things. Let's go to Dawn. Brian Price says, when the Dawn plot was introduced to the show, Prince Doran always had this look on his face and a subtext to his words that he was planning something in regards to the Lannisters. Clearly, the show changed course. Where could this plot have gone better in the show, according to the book material? Well, I'll happily kick this one off. I'm going to do a video at some point quite soon, setting out all of this. It's so the Martells in Dawn, they hated the Lannisters for what they did to Elia and her children. So they, and when I say they, we're talking Doran Martell and also very particularly Oberyn Martell, but their different temperaments meant that they did things in different ways. Oberyn tried to get a revolution going on, and then obviously we saw him on the show when he came up to King's Landing and confronted the Mountain. Pardon me. Doran, a lot more slow, thoughtful, diplomatic. He had a long plan going on, and his long game involved getting the Targaryens back onto the Iron Throne and kicking the Lannisters out. So that was his long game. He initially started by negotiating Viserys to be married off into the Martells. Then he was sent Quentin. This is much later. He sent Quentin, his son, off to go and marry Daenerys. Then he also sent off, and this is just a show. Now we've got a book-only characters here. We're talking about Arianne goes off to investigate and potentially get with Fagon, who is there saying that he is the Aegon, the eldest son of Elia and Rhaegar. So his plan was to ally Dorne to the Targaryens and get the Targaryens to come back in and kick out the Lannisters. That was his long-term plan. They obviously didn't do this in the show, but they needed a way to get the Dornish allied over to Dany in some way. So they short-circuited everything, and it felt to me a little bit, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that the way that they handled Dawn wasn't very good, but it felt a little bit like they started out about to do something and then decided not to, and just took out a couple of cool bits like Oberyn arriving in King's Landing and then left the rest. I would have loved a hint more of the fact that there was some plotting going on, but I accept the fact that on the show the plotting involved a whole load of things like Aegon Phaegon, they just didn't go with that character at all, so it would have made it quite hard. I just personally, I wish they could have shown that there was a bit more going on behind the scenes than just some kick-ass sand snakes and Oberyn Martell. You got anything to add on that, on Aziz? I think you might be muted.
Oh, yes, I am. I unmuted and I thought I muted. Okay, so yeah, I think you covered it pretty well, but I would say that, yeah, there's enough. We don't have the specifics, but we have enough of the timeline to narrow things down to a reasonable set of possibilities. So yeah, I think I don't think there's a lot of room for a lot of other interpretations, unless we're given something that none of us could have possibly predicted. You never know with George, I suppose, but I think that's pretty well covered. Yeah.
Great. So we've got another super chat, Matthew Witham. Can the Celtigars, never know how to pronounce it, bond with dragons? So my personal take is that this is bonding with dragons isn't just a House Targaryen thing. Clearly, all Valyrians could, and it's not just about you just jumping on top of a dragon and magically bonding. We saw with Nettles that this required a huge amount of coaxing and training, and Nettles didn't appear to have much, if any, Valyrian blood to her. So the short answer is anyone can, but it's just some people have got a much more natural affinity to it. But did you want to go any deeper on actually the family itself, Aziz?
One fun thing about them is that we know they have, a crazy amount of wealth, which some of it maybe dates back to the pre-Doom times, or at least the Valyrian days. And the one Celtigar apparently has a horn that can summon krakens, which that sounds cool. But so there's definitely that sort of connection to the ancient past and sort of the freehold, the magic of the freehold. But George has not given us enough detail for us to know how close that relationship is. We know they were a vassal, but we don't know if they have the look. I guess they probably used to. They might not anymore through intermarriage with the mainland. The Valyrians continued to marry the Targaryens, but we don't hear the same about the Celtigars. We don't hear of a single Targaryen-Celtigar marriage at all. There's probably was some, maybe a long time ago, but it doesn't seem to have continued in the post-conquest days. So it's hard to imagine that they've kept they have the proper blood to do so, regardless of, without the other methods you discussed. There's always the Nettles method or the regular non-magical methods, which may or may not work. But as far as having we'll call it blood privilege that the Targaryens have, I don't think so. But there's room for the possibility, because it might be one of those, like, every so often the gene pops back up because it's somewhere in their history, that kind of thing. But I'm pretty doubtful as well.
Excellent. Okay, let's rattle on with the questions from my patrons. Natalie Donald says, excited for Aziz. Just started listening to History of Westeros and I love it. So there you go. Good news there.
Cool.
My question is, what part, if any, do you think House Dane will play in the rest of the story? And who are your candidates for Sword of the Morning? I'll kick off this one, I think. So you, some of you may have seen, I did a video that I suggested that Shara Dane may well be, as with many of my theories, I didn't come up with this originally, many others have, but a Shara Dane may well be alive and well and actually Howland Reed's wife in the neck. So I think that there's a chance in that we might see her again emerging once more. In terms of House Dane more widely, I actually think that their biggest work was done way back at the time of Robert's Rebellion and the Tower of Joy. That was when their main role in the story was. Obviously, we've got the Sword Dawn, which is mystical and magical, and we love it. It's at the moment seems to be still down in Starfall, waiting for a worthy owner. Now, there are only a very small number of candidates of who could have that, assuming they stick with the tradition of it being a member of House Dane who's shown that they are worthy. You could have Gerald Dane Darkstar, who is a sort of a cadet branch. You probably say of the Danes. He certainly is a fine swordsman, but perhaps not as goody as we might want him to be. Edric Dane seems bit too young and wet behind the ears at the moment to be given that responsibility. Certainly not shown himself to have that. I do wonder, following on from my thoughts of where Ashara Dane might be, whether her daughter Mira might be somebody who could end up with that. That would work quite well for me. But there's, as I say, for me, House Dane, their role really was in the past in setting up this drama rather than ending it. I don't think that they're going to have a huge role in that. But Aziz, do you think they will? Is there a big role there? And do you think anyone will emerge as the new Sword of the Morning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, yes, they'll be important. George has hidden their house words, which he originally planned for them to be included and decided to pull them, which means that they're spoilery in some way, or they give something away he doesn't want to give away. I mean, I guess that's spoiler. That's the same thing as spoilery. So in terms of story, he wants to wait to reveal that. And he's clearly keeping the deal with Dawn pretty close to his chest. It's been fantastic and fun to speculate on what Dawn is and its origins and everything. But what we've worked with is pretty small. Like it's the available information on it. There's been a lot of great theories about it, but it's not like we're building off of a lot of literature to make those theories. And I think that originally his plan was for Edric Dane to be the Sword of the Morning, but the 5-year gap changed that. So yeah, I'm on board with that. And I think so. I think that it's going to be a different plan entirely. Instead of Edric Dane wielding it, I think there's a good chance it'll just be Darkstar, and he'll take it by force. If you think about it, we have this whole the idea of Sword of the Morning being only wielded by a Dane who is worthy. Well, who makes that call? Who decides? It's not like a council of the Danes that makes this decision, as far as we know. I mean, maybe there is, but I don't think so. We don't hear of anything like that. Edric Dane is the Lord of Starfall, and he's 12 years old. I mean, who is there that could make this decision? So I think that a lot of times it's just someone, kind of a cultural decision. People decide that somebody's worthy, and they'll say, hey, Arthur Dane, you're worthy, you can have it. And he's being an honorable guy, he's probably like, oh, I'm not worthy, but I'll accept it, blah blah blah. But Darkstar, I think, is just the purpose of Darkstar, I think, is to wield Dawn, because Edric being too young isn't gonna work. And that's why else create this character unless you have plans for him. And it's hard to imagine what those plans are if it doesn't involve Dawn. What I mean by that is he created this character. He definitely added on a cadet branch of House Dane, where there in the first 3 books there was no mention of such. They don't appear in the appendix or the story. So he could have created this character and made it any other house. This character could have been an Ironwood, could have been an Uller, but he specifically made Darkstar a Dane, and that to me is meaningful. If he retcon rather than adding on a character, he retconned a character. So I think that, I mean, it's sort of retconned. So I think that's meaningful. I think that means it plays into something he already had planned rather than being something that grew from his gardening style. I think it's something that grew in a direction he didn't plan and had to make changes rather than something he added later in the game. So a lot of evidence, I think, a lot of meta evidence there pointing to something that George had planned that he had to change his plans for.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree there, and I actually I obviously hate it every time it happens, but I also agree with LML in the chat. Darkstar said, "Joke, LML. You know I'm a big fan." He says Darkstar steals it, serves in Fagon's Kingsguard as an imitation of Arthur Dane, then gets killed. Sword gets to Jon, who has Dane blood like Dany. So I think certainly the first part of that, I would go with it. The fact that the Targaryens, the younger Targaryens, have got Dane blood is something that we don't think about all that much. It's about 3 generations back, maybe 4, but it's definitely there. So potentially, yes, he could. He already obviously has got a Valyrian steel sword, so whether he does swapsies with that, gives that to someone else, maybe Jorah Mormont, who knows? But it seems to work that Darkstar takes it by force rather than being awarded it in some holy ceremony. It kind of has a nice symmetry if he then goes off and serves in Fagon's Kingsguard in some way. I quite like that. And that then brings Dawn out from hiding in Starfall, so it kind of all ties in. Sorry, did you want to add to that?
No, I just said right on. I do. I really like the Rhaegar. I really like the Dane, the Darkstar standing in as a proxy for Arthur Dane to legitimize Fagon. He'll have his father's best friend's relative, and he'll have his, the Targaryen sword and all this stuff. Yeah, it fits really well. We can't say for sure obviously it'll happen, but I'm a big fan of that theory.
Yeah, I like it too. Debbie Buckles, one of my patrons, asked a lot of questions. So I'm just going to pick one of them if that's okay, Debbie. Well, here's one. What happened at the brothel with Podrick? This is not as silly a question as perhaps you might think, and I'm sure I've seen a video somewhere, someone or maybe read something somewhere. I tend to like the theory that actually it wasn't that he's some kind of god in the bedroom, that he just had these magic powers, but actually we look to see who was he with, who were they being paid by, what might they be trying to get out of him in some way. Could they be buttering him up in some way, making him feel good about himself, giving him some wine, then asking him questions about, say, Tyrion? That kind of makes sense to me a lot more than that he's he's got this magic penis or whatever. So the person who's most likely to do that would be Littlefinger, in my view. So I think that's a much better explanation of what's going on. Did you have any thoughts on that, or can you remember where that came from? I honestly can't.
I'm pretty sure he does have a Valyrian steel penis. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. No, there is an inside joke behind all this. Apparently, I can't believe I'm spacing on his name. What's the actor's name again? Daniel. It's Daniel something. Anyway, he's a real flirt apparently, and he apparently has just charmed a lot of the women on the cast, people who work behind the scenes and everything. So they, as a joke, they made it as if all the women love him. So they made the scene sort of in reference to that. That's what I read that somewhere in an interview. So that's, yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. It's just they wanted to have a little fun with his real life personality and make a reference to it. But Daniel Portman, that's it. Yeah, Portman, that's right. So Daniel Portman in real life is a lady killer. So there you go. Now you know. All the ladies love Daniel Portman.
Well, all the ladies I know do. So yeah.
The chat is agreeing.
Okay, so we've got 3 or 4 more questions from my patrons, and then I think after that we'll start wrapping up. So guys, if you got any further questions, now's the time to start dropping them. Piano Diva 11 is asking about the newly released excerpt from Fire and Blood, which we've sort of this is another thing that's just dropped that I've not yet had a chance to read. But Aziz, I know that you have, and this is talking about the names and identities of the original Kingsguard and whether this teaches us anything. So, well, go basically. What do you think we can learn from them?
Okay, well, one thing I wanted to throw out that's kind of fun that I got, there's a couple of excerpts that are out. So just real quick before I answer the question, there's another excerpt that's behind a paywall in the Times UK, and it involves discussion of dragon seeds. And I just love this little excerpt because it contained a line that wasn't in the World of Ice and Fire, because some of these things are in the World of Ice and Fire also, as we know. And there's a little bit about mushrooms, pantaloons becoming a flame and him running around the room. And it's meant to be kind of comedic and funny, but it's also a reference. It's a good example of George being sneaky with his how he presents the information. Mushroom gives all these really salacious stories and really like tabloidy type stories. And I remember in the World of Ice and Fire came out, a lot of people tended to believe them, even though they seemed a little out there. Some of them seemed believable, but some of them were kind of crazy. And there was a movement in the fandom to kind of take everything he said as true, even though some of it was pretty out there. Well, now we have George pushing back against that, or at least clarifying by giving us an actual pants on fire moment for Mushroom. His pants were on fire. So that's just hilarious. I didn't catch that the first time. The second time I read the excerpt, I was like, wait, his pants are on fire. That's hilarious. So anyway, okay, so to answer the question of the Kingsguard, we have Richard Root, Sir Addison Hill, who is the Bastard of Cornfield. We have Gregor Good and Griffith Good, and Sir Humphrey the Mummer, and Sir Robin Darkland, and Corlys Velaryon, Lord Commander. So we have a Velaryon, that's pretty unsurprising. We have because the Velaryons are so close by and so tightly knit with the Targaryens, and of course Corlys is the same name as the sea snake, so I suppose the sea snake was named for this guy, or both of them are named for some other Corlys long before. Now the Darklands are a family right there, Duskendale area. So they would have been close to the Targaryens fairly early on. And this Addison Hill character, obviously that's a Westerman. I don't know I don't know the Root family. I'm not sure they even exist, or if they've been mentioned. That one I don't know that there's much to say about them. They're from Harroway's town, so they're another Riverlands house. They are still around, apparently. Yeah, we do have them. We do have them hanging out with are at the Siege of Riverrun helping out the Lannisters. They have bent the knee, so they do still exist. The Goods, I'm not sure about them either. These are some kind of obscure houses, and we've got several bastards involved here. So yeah, I'm not sure we can say a whole lot about it. I think the more important story is the formation and Visenya's attitude towards them, and the confirmation that she used the Night's Watch bylines to do this, which I think everybody kind of assumed, but we didn't actually know that for a fact. It's just seemed really likely. Now we know for effect. So, and this is interesting because I think we might see this happen again. One of the reasons I think this is important is it might be there's going to be new Kingsguards picked, and that this decision-making process might be crucial. For example, we just had this question about Darkstar. If Aegon was talking about the same thing. Aegon was talking like Visenya. In the Dance of Dragons, he said, I want people who are loyal to me. I don't want the best fighters. I want people who will die for me, like Sir Duck. And that was a really neat moment because Duck is super loyal, and it is more. And that's, like I said, this is the same attitude Visenya had. She cares more about the loyalty than about how good they are. So if we have people like Darkstar getting onto Kingsguards, well, that's a flaw in the process right there. That guy, he's not someone you can trust no matter who you are. And if Dany is going to pick a Kingsguard or Queensguard, then who's that going to be? You know, and if there's so many permutations of possibilities there, because what if, I don't know how you feel about the possibility that Barristan Selmy will flip to Aegon. It's out there as a possibility. I don't know if you think it's likely or not, or 50-50, or let's just say it does happen. Well, you know, he would probably join Fagon's Kingsguard as well. And maybe he wouldn't be so happy with Darkstar being on there. And now we're really getting into the weeds with possibilities on possibilities. But I think this is going to matter because we have up to two different Kingsguards being formed, potentially in the Winds of Winter. And or if not, or maybe one in the Winds of Winter and one in the Dreamers Break. So there's a lot of chances for Kingsguards to form, basically. And so I think it's important that he highlighted this process of what matters in choosing these close bodyguards. So I think that's maybe where my head is right now. There may be other things to pick at this from, but I think that's what it speaks to me on, is the foreshadowing.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, I've not read the extract yet, but in terms of the actual names, then I don't think that there is anything particularly special there. They were picked, it would appear, deliberately in order to show the breadth of the Seven Kingdoms, but and more about whether they would be good at their job than whether they were from some great lordly family. So I think that is a takeaway that tells us a lot about the people who appointed them, Visenya, Aegon, who actually were involved in the original process. I think that tells us a lot about them and the fact that they cared less about sort of lordly families than perhaps their successors did, because in later years it really became more and more about you had to come from a noble family. The idea that you might have people from the kind of nothing backgrounds actually became a lot more rare. So Duncan the Tall was an oddity, being a former hedge knight.
One other thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to say is that if it's interesting which houses were picked here, we have a couple houses we have one house from the west. The Goods are from the, I believe they're from the Riverlands also. Well, actually, we don't know where they're from. We just know that there was a Kingsguard for Rhaenyra also in them. So there's a Riverlander, and the Riverlanders would have been the Riverlanders would have been a bit more loyal potentially because Aegon raised the Tullys up to rule and gave them back their own realm, whereas the Ironborn had ruled them before. And of course, the Velaryons and the Darklands were kind of neighbors and already existing vassals in one case. So, so there's a lot to say there, but we'll have to see. We'll have to wait for more.
Yeah, I see that Joe Magician is out there in the chat. Hi, Matt. Good to see you. We were talking about you just before you came on, so we must have said your name 3 times or something. We've got just a couple more questions I want to get through. This one is probably quite a bit quicker. Anime Lover, I don't know. I think we've already answered one of your super chats, so thank you. But you asked over on Patreon who we think might have the most epic death scene, and who will live to an old age and die in his or her sleep. I think that for me, who's going to live to an old age? This is the Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things again. Those are the people that will survive, the people who have been most hurt by this, and then can build afresh. So people like Sam and Gilly, I could certainly see surviving and living on into old age. So people like that. In terms of who's going to have on the show, this is the most epic death scenes. I mean, I don't know. Drogon, Danny, controversial, but I think that it'll be the dragons. I sincerely hope and believe will not survive. And I when I say I hope, I just do not think that it works thematically for me for them to be hanging around if the White Walkers go back away. Aziz, your thoughts on who's going to just pick one from each side, perhaps? Who's going to live to old age and who's going to have the most epic death scene?
Okay, so I already mentioned Arya as someone I think is going to die. So I think Sansa lives. I think I'm big on Sansa surviving. I think she's in the top group of if I was picking my top 5 most likely to survive amongst main characters, she would definitely be up there near the top. I agree with you that I don't think Daenerys will live. I think Jon will live. I think he will be traumatized severely and be like sort of a Frodo type, where maybe he'd be happier if he hadn't lived, but he'll survive and just be very traumatized, be like wolf-like maybe from his aspect. And I think that I agree with you that Sam will live, and probably Gilly makes it too. He's got to leave a couple of couples around, and there's so few to choose from. So that one could make it. I think that's I also don't see Sam getting too close to the action. He's gotten close to the action in the past. I think that he maybe won't do that so much anymore. I mean, he's already down so far south. There's different action down there. There's definitely action around the Citadel, but it's not the others, at least not yet. So I feel like sometimes you can tell who's going to live, at least in the short term, by whether or not there's another POV near them. You know, so Sam being at Old Town with no other POV other than the one who had one chapter and died. There's not a lot of, maybe he'll live for a while, but maybe he's going to move too.
I don't know. We've also don't forget about the Winds of Winter preview chapters. We've got somebody just off the coast who's got a new a new POV chapter going on there. So
good point. He's probably more likely to die than Sam, especially given his current circumstances.
As well, right. So I think somebody's going to die.
Yep.
But I think Sam will survive. Guys, I'm gonna start bringing this one to a close now. 2 or 3 of my patrons, I didn't get a chance to answer your questions. Apologies for that. I will reply to you direct on Patreon and answer them there. While I talk for just a moment or so, Aziz, do you want to have a quick look through the chat and see if there's any a good question there that we might just be able to sort of end on as a sort of a final question? While Aziz is doing that, I'll just remind you again to please check out his channel. First of all, I only have people on here who I would personally recommend you go and check out their work. History of Westeros is excellent. You can find it not just as a YouTube channel, but there's also, I know there's a website that I'm sure he'll be able to plug in a moment, and the podcast as well. So please do go and look that out. In terms of my stuff, as I said earlier, I'll be focusing a lot of Fire and Blood over the course of the next few weeks, so please do have a look out for that. That will be starting very soon. The book itself is coming out on Tuesday. Aziz, have you picked a question for us to be rounding it all off with?
Okay, there are a couple of things I noticed here. One's an observation rather than a question that I think was a great observation, something that is relevant to a question we just answered a few minutes ago, which was related to the Kingsguard. I pointed out that there's at least 2 Kingsguard forming right now, and I forgot one of the really more obvious ones, which is that Robert Arryn is forming a Winged Guard, which is basically a Kingsguard as well. And that's a perfect example. And in fact, one of the people likely to get on that Kingsguard is someone that you don't want on your Kingsguard, Lynn Corbray. So this concept of people that don't belong on Kingsguards is coming up in several places, and it's maybe even coming up on the Watch. You got some people that probably aren't worthy of serving on the Wall, but they really need all the help they can get. The Kingsguard's a different story. And the other one, I see a question here. Someone wanted to know who has the better claim to Storm's End between Gendry and Edric Storm. And assuming they both live, which, who knows with Edric Storm. I think Gendry's it's fair to say that he's a step up in terms of how much screen time he's had and what level of character people would consider him. And but he is older. Edric Storm is the younger of the two. If I'll double check that while you weigh in, but I'm almost positive Gendry was born before Edric. So yeah, why don't you weigh in while I double check that?
Yeah, so this is a question of a technicality, and the technicality is at the moment neither of them are, because they are baseborn, they're bastardborn, so they're actually not recognized. What needs to happen is that they would need to be recognized. If one of them were recognized and the other weren't, then that one would be the one who's got the better claim, simply because they got recognized. If they both are, then yes, it goes to the eldest, and in a moment Aziz is going to confirm for us which one is the eldest.
It is Gendry who's older. Yeah.
Excellent. So Gendry, in that situation, Gendry would have the better claim. But realistically, the world that we're living in here is a world of people giving stuff to people, giving stuff to other people because they want to. It's power. It's a world of power. And if somebody decides to give Storm's End to whoever because they have the ability to do that, then suddenly they have it. And so we need to sometimes, I think, get out of the mindset of that there is a clear line of succession and that is what is right and good. George R.R. Martin deliberately muddies these things up. He's giving us, and the Targaryen thing is absolutely perfect example of this. We've got Dany, who thinks that she is the heir to the Targaryens. We as the sort of the holders of R plus L equals J think, actually no, that's John, although hang on, we know that they got married. Rhaegar and Lyanna got married on the show. Were they married in the books? Not quite so sure what's going on there. And what's going with Aegon? Is he real? Is he who's claiming to be? Because that would perhaps give him an even greater claim. So that's left a lot muddier than we might otherwise expect it to be. And deliberately so by George R.R. Martin. It's a world where might is right, and people get given stuff and they take stuff because they have the power to do it. When Robert Baratheon made himself king, yes, they had this excuse that he had some Targaryen blood in him, but the reason why he was king was not because he was the next in line to the throne. It was because he won a war. He won a war to get himself on the Iron Throne. So that's the sort of the overarching answer to this.
I agree. I think there's one potential for a clash between the two is if, say, Dany legitimizes one of them and, say, Fagon legitimizes a different one of them, right? And then they have two different legitimizations from two different claimants. That would all obviously be resolved by whichever Dany or Fagon comes out ahead, and I guess we could probably guess who that will be. I do think there's a very good chance that one of those two does end up with Storm's End at the end. I think that's not unlikely. I would pick Gendry of the two, but we'll see. We might get the show. The show might reveal that one to us, because Gendry being a character on the show and being alive and set to have some kind of arc in season 8, that's the kind of high point that the show is probably not going to mess with too much, because it's kind of an aftermath thing. It's not even really a thing for the plot going forward. It's just something like, well, everything's done. This is the end. Who's still alive? Who gets what? They don't have to build on that. It's just, hey, Gendry gets Storm's End. Good for him. Something like that. I could see that happening.
And on the show, they effectively merged those two characters into Gendry anyway.
Yeah,
so,
you're right. Yeah. So that won't tell us. You're right, because it's the same guy, kind of. You're right.
Okay, I will just very quickly answer one question which I just spotted in the chat, just because I love it. Alexandra Sandu, will Bronn get his castle? Yes, I think he will, and my humble prediction is that he will be given the twins, because he was promised 2 castles, and as we know, the House Frey is no longer there, so they need a new lord there. And if he's been promised 2 castles, the twins are two castles, so I think that is where he will end up. I think that he will survive, incidentally, until the very end. So guys, that's it. I'm going to wrap up now. Aziz, do you want to just remind everyone where they can find you on the internet?
Absolutely. I am to be found as Westeros History on YouTube. We're History of Westeros on iTunes and Acast and SoundCloud and all the non-visual podcast sites. And we have a website, historyofwesteros.com. We're Westeros History on Twitter and Facebook as well. We have a group and all that good stuff. So basically, anytime you type in History of Westeros or Westeros History, you're a pretty good chance you'll find us. And yeah, like I said, we'll have a Nymeria episode out soon. That's Nymeria of the Rhoynar, not the Direwolf. We've already got one, and the next one is almost done being edited. So look out for that in about a week, unless you're one of our patron members, in which case you'll get it sooner. So then we'll be doing Fire and Blood stuff like you. So we'll probably have to have some live streams. And it's past time that we had you on our show. We haven't been doing a lot of live streams lately, so not a lot of opportunities for guests, but you're on our short list. So I'm looking forward to that. This new material is probably the right trigger for that to finally happen.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'd obviously love to come on anytime you want, and I'm sure I'll be asking you back on here again at some point soon.
Sounds great.
Guys, thank you so much for this. Thank you particularly for the super chats, for the fantastic conversations going on there in the chat, and to all my patrons. Apologies to the 2 or 3 I didn't get a chance to answer your questions. I will go and reply on Patreon to you. But thank you, guys. We'll be back here same time next week with another. I think I've got another couple of creators lined up, some people that I think you will really enjoy as well. So take care, everyone, and I'll see you again next week.